Guys, gals, non-binary pals, it is finally time. It is finally here. It's finally time for the album of the year 2024. Yeah, honestly, this is like my favorite video of the year to do. I get very excited when I think about doing my album of the year videos. It's quite stressful, obviously, because I've really had to think about this quite hard. I've changed the order of these 15 albums more times than I care to think about. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to make a decision. I have to decide on a running order as to what is my favourite album of the year. Now, I kind of lumped every single genre that I listen to into the one list. I was tempted to make a prog and non-prog list, but ultimately I listen to a lot more prog than I do not prog, so it's all getting lumped into the one list anyway, so whatever. Now, these 15 albums have all at some point over the course of the year occupied the #1 spot. I will not mince my words here when I say that the gap between the albums in terms of quality, in terms of how much I've enjoyed them, it is nanometers. So the reality is that number 15 on this list isn't really much different up here to #1 on the list. And honestly, that just made it really, really difficult for me to actually formulate the list and really make it the final countdown, as it were. So enough of my waffling. Let's get straight into things with number 15. Right, kicking the list off at number 15, we have got Lampiao Rei by Papangu. Love this band, love this album. I was not prepared for what level of strangeness I was getting myself involved for when I first pressed play on this album, but let me tell you now, by the time the final track had played out, I'd already dropped the vinyl into my online shopping cart and was checking out. Huge fan of this album. I think this is one of the strangest things I've listened to this year, but in the best possible way. It's got this curious fusion of almost black metal aesthetics in the early half of the album to be replaced by kind of weird Brazilian folk instrumentation and strange progressive rock passages in the latter half. It's a fusion that works remarkably well. It's a fusion that's kept me coming back to this album time and time again. If you like your music on the weird side, the quirky side, the really unusual side, then Papangu have definitely got you covered with Lampiao Rei. Okay, number 14, it is Azure and Fim. No stranger to my lists already, Fim is an absolutely fantastic piece of work. Covering a substantial amount of time across 2 CDs, this magnum opus of a progressive rock opera is really something to behold. The scope of the story is magnificent. There's a huge amount of peripheral detail. If memory serves correctly, if I just open up the... yeah, here we go. Check that out on the lyrics booklet. You've got this entire map of the world. You know, everything there feels like it's... It feels like the musicians have basically decided to make a Dungeons & Dragons campaign into a concept album. It's got that feel, it's got that kind of attitude, that kind of approach to everything. The sheer breadth of instrumentation that goes on here is absolutely unprecedented. There is so much going on. There's so many creative fills and little passages to get your teeth hooked into. It makes for an album that is incredibly dense, richly rewarding, and one of the most exciting and interesting things I've listened to all year. Okay, at number 13, this I think is the earliest entry on my list. This album came out quite early in the year, and it is a true testament to how good it is that it's managed to stick around to reappear once again at the final furlong. It is Traverse the Bealach by Sgale. Now, if ever there was an album to take a walk in the misty, snow-capped mountains of northern Scotland, it is this. I have never felt atmosphere quite like this album is capable of. Every single moment of this feels like it is steeped in the rich textural variety that only this sort of music can provide. Everything about this screams winter, it screams desolation, it screams emptiness and longing. I absolutely love the gorgeous atmospherics that are generated by this album. I think the unique delivery of the vocals really fits the style of the music, and I have been in love with this album from the very first moment I listened to it, right up until the end of the year. Right, at number 12, it is Wheels Within Wheels by Mir. Now, I did dunk on the album artwork of this one quite a bit in my video about album artwork. I mean, you can't really see it very well with the way this is lit, so you just have to take my word for it that it's fine, it's whatever. But thankfully for me, the content of the music within this album is so much better than the artwork might suggest it is. What we have on here, it is bright, it is bubbly, it is beautiful. It is a kind of music that you can just feel the warmth and the passion and sheer positive energy that comes from every single track on here. Now, I enjoyed the previous album too, this Playing House. I thought it was great, but it didn't quite set my heart alight in the same way that Wheels Within Wheels did. There were honestly so many beautiful moments on this album, it's difficult to know where to even start. But I feel that if you value music that triumphs beauty above all else, then Mir's Wheels Within Wheels is likely to be one of your favourite albums, not just of this year, but of this decade. This is an exceptional release and you cannot afford to miss it. Okay, at number 11, it's the first one that I don't have physically because it's not available physically. You can only get it on digital, but whatever. It is Luck Won't Save You with Through the Mountains of Melancholia. This is a really, really strong album, and it came out of nowhere for me. I forget how I even found this. I think somebody recommended it to me. If it was you and I've forgotten your name, I do apologise for that, but thank you all the same. This really did strike a chord with me. I've been jonesing for some kind of Between the Buried and Me-esque prog metal for a little while now, and in the absence of the band themselves actually coming back due to various situations, shall we say, going on, I really needed something to kind of fill that gap in the interim. Luck Won't Save You have done more than just fill that Between the Buried and Me-shaped hole in my heart. What they've done is they've taken what I love about that band, the breakdowns, the quirkiness, the eccentric musicianship and great vocals, and they've kind of dialed it up to 11, making for an album that Between the Buried and Me wish they could have written. Now, that's not to dunk on BTBAM at all, they are one of my favourite bands after all, but what Luck Won't Save You have done here really does transcend what I would have expected the band to actually come out with next, and as a result they have raised the bar incredibly high. If you like your progressive metal extremely weird, very quirky, but with plenty of brutality, breakdowns, and lots of off-kilter instrumentation thrown into the mix, then this album by Luck Won't Save You is going to be more than sufficient to whet your appetite. Do not miss this one. Right, top 10 now. At number 10, we've got Versa with A Voyage, A Destination Part 2. Those of you who've been following the channel for a while will know that I have been a huge fan of Versa for quite a little while now. Obviously, I discovered them a few years ago with the first album in this series, and now that we have the second one, I feel that the journey, the destination, if you will, is complete. This really takes the foundational levels that were explored on A Voyage to Destination Part 1 and brings it up to another level. We've still got the various post-rock elements that were explored on the first album, but what they've done is they've thrown in a lot more classic and traditional progressive rock, but without losing sight of what made the first album such a warm and comforting experience. If I was to describe this album in one sentence, it would be joy. There is something so intrinsically warming about this album. Now, I know this might sound weird, but every single song on this feels like it was made by real people. And what do I mean by that? I don't know, it's like sometimes you'll find bands and it all feels very mechanical, it all feels quite clinical, as if there's a machine doing a lot of the work behind the background. But not with Versa. Everything here feels so organic, so meticulously well put together. There's the human touch in every single element of this. This is fine calligraphy turned into music. It is a beautiful experience. It is fabulous to listen to. It warms my heart from top to bottom. It's gorgeous in every single way that I can possibly think of, and they have not disappointed with the second half. In fact, in a lot of ways, they have exceeded themselves in ways I didn't think possible. Absolutely gorgeous album, brilliant band, and I adore this.
He invested a lot of money all over the world, and he's going to use it to film some of his film for his film company. It involves horses and sex.
Right, number 9 brings us to Opeth with their latest, The Last Will and Testament. Yeah, I did a pretty extensive review on this one quite recently. Love this one. Really quite surprised by how much I love this one. Obviously, I've been a little bit hit and miss on Opeth for a while now since Heritage came out, because like a lot of people who are more into the heavier side of the progressive metal spectrum, a lot of the albums that have come out recently have sort of, left me wanting, shall we say. Now, while obviously The Last Will and Testament isn't entirely a throwback to the likes of Ghost Reveries, Blackwater Park, Still Life, etc., etc., it kind of bridges the gap between the old and the new. There's a lot of the very progressive elements in this album that you come to expect from like In Court of Venenum and stuff like that, but there's also the darker, more sinister stuff going on, which you would expect from albums like Still Life. Now, while I wouldn't call this a fusion between the two styles, what I think I would comfortably call this is a nice halfway house between them. It's neither too heavy nor too proggy, but it also manages to be a bit of both at the same time, and it makes for what I feel is one of the most complete Opeth albums we've had in a long time, and a sure sign to me that the band has still got plenty of fire left in them despite this being their 14th studio album. Right, at number 8, we've got Kinship by Jotun. Oh my goodness, talk about your comeback story for this one. I didn't particularly enjoy Jotun's first album. I thought it was fine, there was a lot of buzz about it, but I just didn't quite catch the wave. The hype wasn't doing it for me. So I approached this one, Kinship, their second album, with a little bit of, shall we say, caution. But it turns out I needn't be cautious, because what they've got here is, obviously, as you can tell by its positioning in this list, what I consider to be one of the best albums of 2024. The sheer scale of the power on this album, the glorious soaring vocals, the ridiculous guitar leads, the crazy drums and incredible bass work, everything sort of like fits together to create one of the most demanding, complex and sumptuously rewarding tapestries of music that's been released this year. Everything on this album feels like it is singing to the mountains with how passionate it is. The vocals absolutely kill it from every single possible aspect you can think of. Incredible cleans, guttural growls, all accompanied by some of the most incredible guitar work I've heard all year. Jotun's Kinship is the poster child for how to do a sophomore album for me. It takes all the things that I thought were good about the first album and addresses all of the concerns that I had to make for an album that feels so rich and so rewarding that to have it any lower on this list would just be criminal. Right, at number 7, it's one that just keeps on growing and growing in my eyes. It is Reconciliation by Almo. I can remember quite vividly, my buddy Notes was telling me about this album, saying like, this is incredible stuff, I've just got this promo from this guy and it's absolutely blowing my mind. You need to reach out to him, you need to get your ears around this thing, because honestly, it's incredible. And you know what? No lies detected. Reconciliation is every bit the prog metal banger I've been needing. Again, much like with Luck Won't Save You in the absence of Between the Buried and Me, Almo have come and brought in the goods in the absence of New Haken. Now obviously Fauna only came out last year I think it was or whatever, but I feel this is doing a better job at being Haken than Haken have managed. I mean, sure, yes, you can levy criticisms at it all you want, that it's basically a carbon copy and a clone, yada yada yada, whatever. Frankly, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery here, and I think Almo does enough of his own thing to be able to get away with it. When you consider as well the fact this is just one guy doing everything himself, I think it just becomes even more extraordinary what's been achieved on this album. There are moments on this which are bigger in scope, grander in scale, and more epic in nature than anything I've heard from some of the bigger prog metal bands in the last 10 to 15 years. You could easily argue that this is a better Dream Theater album than anything in the Mike Mangini era. Admittedly, that's not much of a high bar to cross, but you know what I'm trying to say here, right? Everything that Almo has done here works for me. Everything hits, everything lands, all the melodies are brilliant, all the guitar grooves are infectious, the vocals outstanding, the keyboard's incredible, and the compositions just feel so well crafted and so thoughtful that I just cannot stop listening to this album. It has just blown my mind wide open and set a new standard for what I will expect from all modern progressive metal going forwards. Okay, at number 6 we have got Mannequin by Kairos. Yeah, wow, I got my Spotify Unwrapped this morning, and let me tell you, this album kind of dominated. I'm not gonna lie, there was a lot of tracks on this which were in my top 5 tracks of the year. In fact, only one song of my top 5 was not from this album. It's incredible. I love this so much. It is an absolutely glorious mix of 80s synth pop, modern prog rock with a little dash of metal thrown in there just for good measure. Shelby Logan Warren is an absolute icon. She is one of the most exceptional keyboardists, brilliant vocalists, greatest composers of the modern progressive rock era. I think this is a brilliant album with not a single duff moment on it. The double hit of Esoterica and The End in Mind is literally one of my favourite musical moments from the 2020s so far. Those two songs back to back just give me the good shivers all over every single time I even think about listening to them. Incredible album, outstanding musicianship, and one of the catchiest and most infectiously enjoyable albums I've ever heard. Okay, we're into the top 5. Now, spoiler alert, everything here is a little bit darker and heavier, so buckle up, kiddos, we're going in. At number 5, it is Pleroma by Orgone. Yeah, this is such a curious album, but it's so interesting and so different to a lot of the music that I've listened to that to have this anywhere else other than the top 5 just feels strange to me. If you're looking for the kind of music that is not afraid to challenge your preconceived notions as to what black metal actually is, then look no further than Pleroma. To try and describe this album with words is honestly quite challenging, so you'll have to bear with me here whilst I do my best. Imagine if you took the darkest, scariest, most sinister black metal and segued randomly into French lounge jazz music for no apparent reason other than just why the hell not? It shouldn't work. It shouldn't work. On paper it sounds ridiculous, but in practice the fusion works. These two opposing elements just shouldn't mesh or gel together at all. What should be happening on this album is a confused mess of nonsense, but what we have here is one of the most skillfully directed, brilliantly composed, absolutely ingenious pieces of music I've heard in a very long time. This is not an album for everyone. I will emphasize this point every single time I talk about this record. This really will not stick for everyone, and that's fine. That's okay if this isn't for you. But honestly, if you value experimentation in music, if you like bands who aren't afraid to do what they actually want to do, rather than conforming to any particular strict guidelines or anything, then Pleroma by Orgone is honestly one of the most fascinating, creative, and individual listens you will ever have. Right, the next one is another digital-only release. At number 4, it is Ubiquity with The Ascendant Travels Among the Stars. So again, we've had a Between the Buried and Me replacement, we've had a Haken replacement, but what happens in the same year that Opeth comes out when you have an Opeth replacement? What we have here with Ubiquity is honestly what I really actually wanted the new Opeth to be. Now don't get me wrong, Last Will and Testament for what it is fantastic. But honestly, I was jonesing for this. This is what I wanted. This callback to the glory days, the beautiful progressive death metal days of Opeth, where you had the likes of Ghost Reveries, of Blackwater Park, Deliverance, Still Life, all of these incredible, classic, timeless albums. Okay, so maybe it's a little bit early days, and perhaps I shouldn't be comparing this to the likes of Blackwater Park, which has been around for like almost 25 years. But The Ascendant Travels Among the Stars has all the hallmarks of a modern classic of the progressive death metal genre. Everything feels huge here, very maximalist, very intense and in your face. The riffs here just keep on coming, they keep on going, they keep knocking everything out of the park. The way the keyboards interplay in the background and sort of accent off the huge riffs, just, it's so good. It's so freaking good. Just thinking about some of the songs on this album, I just want to scream. I just want to yell and just throw this album at people and tell them, look, if you are missing those days of Opeth and you don't much care for things like The Last Will and Testament, which is fine, you have to listen to this. You can't miss this. This is absolutely such an incredible ride. It's so full. It's so intense. It's so perfectly crafted. Every song hits. Every riff and passage is incredible. Every vocal delivery knocks my socks off every time I hear it, and I cannot get enough. I am honestly quite desperate for a physical release, so if more of us throw money at them, then maybe they can do a physical pressing, even if it's only a CD. A man can dream, right? Right, at number 3, we have got Blood Incantation and Absolute Elsewhere. Yeah, this really did it for me. I love this album. Now, I liked their previous releases, I did. I thought they were very good, but they haven't hit me quite like Absolute Elsewhere has, and I think what the real missing ingredient was the fact that the band have embraced progressive rock in a way that they haven't really touched on previous albums. There's these enormous, lengthy, spacey pieces on both of the twin tracks of this album. Because this is just a 2-track album, you know, you got your 2 epics, side 1, side 2, both over 20 minutes. And there's something to be said, the individual identity of each track against each other works so incredibly well. This is not a one-trick pony, this is not a case of the entire album sounds the same from start to finish. There is a glorious amount of interplay between the various keyboard and synthesizer passages against the brutality of the death metal, the rolling thunder of the drums, the grim darkness of the vocals. All of it sort of trades off against each other. You got this kind of element of one goes in, the other comes out, one goes in, the other comes out, like then it flows and it ebbs up and down across the mountains like a river, and it's beautiful. You're never left wanting for too long at any given moment. So you might be thinking maybe the death metal is going to be too intense, or maybe the atmospheric sections are too long and plodding, but neither of these statements could be further from the truth. Blood Incantation have balanced this. This is a perfectly balanced album. It's almost absurd how well they've managed to balance the light and the dark on this album. Don't let the completely indecipherable band logo fool you. This is an album that has just as much in common with the likes of Pink Floyd and Tangerine Dream as it does Death or Anthrax or whatever. I absolutely love this album. I think it is definitely destined to be a future classic that people will be talking about in a few decades to come. So if you've not listened to this one yet, get your ears wrapped around it, strap yourself in, it's a great ride. Okay, number 2. I'm not holding it in my hands yet because it hasn't turned up in the mail, but it's on its way. It is the debut album from Icelandic band Mur. Yeah, I reviewed this one pretty recently, I know, and I held off. I was very tempted to put this at number 1, and I still am tempted, but no, I've held myself back. We're not doing this one at number 1. It's too soon. But the fact that this one is still at number 2 in the list, despite how recently this came out, should speak volumes of the quality of this record. Debut albums are always a lot of fun for me, because you kind of go into it expecting nothing with everything to gain. Now, oftentimes a band will come out of nowhere, they will have their statement piece with their debut, but it doesn't really land or it doesn't really stick with you. It just feels a bit like, okay, whatever. And then bands like Mur come along, and good lord. Now, I am really trying to think to myself, how on earth do I summarize this album in this short space of time? Obviously, the full review has been fairly recently, and my full thoughts of it were done on that, but I'm very much shooting from the hip with this video. Mur's self-titled debut can be compared to a lot of things. It's got elements of Devin Townsend, elements of Opeth, Cult of Luna, Isis, Panopticon, all these huge names within the progressive metal world. But somehow, despite all the various similarities that there definitely are, they've managed to craft a sound and an identity for themselves which is singularly unique amongst their peers. I cannot stress to you enough how hard this album hit me. This was an almost total knockout body blow to me. I was not prepared for something with an album cover like that to come out with the music that it did. It's huge, it's expansive, it's technical, it's melodic, it's brutal, it's savage, it's everything I love in music and more besides. If I'd had more time with this album, if I'd had this one for like maybe another couple of months, say it came out in September or August or whatever, and I'd had like maybe 2 or 3 months to sort of ruminate on this one, I really do think this could have been my number 1 album of the year. But I just couldn't in good conscience take my number 1 spot off the list. Right, okay, last year my number 1 spot went to Himmlerbarken Volume 2 by Moon Safari, and I stand by that absolutely amazing album that still blows my mind to this day. However, we are going a lot darker this year, whereas Moon Safari was a very joyous, very beautiful treatise as to what modern progressive rock can be. My number one spot this year is Bellum 2 by Aquilus. This is obviously quite the antithesis to what we had last year at the number one spot, and very much shows off the two wolves living inside my head, you know. God, where do I start? Where do I start with Bellum 2? This album, this crazy piece of music, this hour-long, beautiful thing, has lived rent-free in my head since the day it came out. I have been obsessed with this. This is everything I wanted music to be this year. Every time I think to myself about the other albums on this list and how much I have enjoyed them and how much I do dearly love them, every single one of them with my whole heart, nothing hit me quite so hard as Bellum 2 did. Now, I feel like my life has kind of been split, musically at least, into various different phases, you know. When I was a kid, I was in my pop music era. Then in my teenage years, I got into nu metal. After that, I got into thrash metal. After thrash metal, I got into prog metal. Then from prog metal to death metal. And now, in my late 30s, I'm definitely in my black metal phase. And Bellum 2 is the exact kind of black metal that I really have needed. This is cinematic, it is atmospheric, it is grand in scale and ambition. This is like the soundtrack to the most sinister, most insane, crazy movie you will ever see. It feels equal parts as comfortable being a film score as it does an atmospheric black metal album. The orchestrations on this record are astonishing. The number of times I've been left just mouth agape, staring into the middle distance, just absolutely in shock about what I've been listening to. I remember the first time I heard this album, when it finally closed out, with that sort of 1920s feeling like something out of The Shining monologue at the end. Oh my God, I was stunned. I couldn't speak. There was a full 5 minutes where I was just trying to unpack everything I'd listened to. And even now, about 7 months after this has come out, it still rocks me to my core every single time I listen to it. Essentially built on the foundations of two massive epics with some sort of interstitial stuff flowing around it, this album feels like an art piece. This feels like it has deliberately not been structured like a traditional album. It feels like it is an artistic statement to the world. And what Aquilus have done here is wormed their way into my heart, into my soul, and created one of the greatest atmospheric black metal albums of all time. I adore this album. I think this is an exquisite piece, the likes of which I feel lucky to be alive to be experiencing. Now, I understand, of course, this won't be everybody's cup of tea, but honestly, that really is fine. But at the end of the day, this is my top albums of 2024, and I have to be true to myself. And if I put this anywhere other than the top spot, I would just be lying to myself. So, there we go. That's it. That's it for 2024. Yeah, hell of a year. It's been really hard, like I say, really hard to figure out my favourite albums of the year. And I know that I'll probably have some high-profile releases that I've missed that will be on your ones, but again, that's fine. We all have our own choices, we all have our own lists. That's why I want to know what your favourite albums of 2024 are. Make me regret my decisions. Show me the albums that really rock your world and make me suddenly start rethinking this entire list so I can throw it in the bin and start over and do another version of this video. If indeed you did make it this far, guys, thank you so very much for watching. It has been a hell of a 2024, and I can't wait to see what 2025 has in store for us all. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.